A new week has begun, and with it, a new chapter in the journey of faith. Monday is not just another day. It's a chance to walk closer to God, to live with renewed hope, and to let the light of Christ guide our steps. The early morning mist lay gently upon the waters of the Sea of Galilee. The sky was painted in delicate shades of pink and gold, as if heaven itself was greeting the earth. The air was still, save for the quiet whisper of waves touching the shore. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the sun began to rise, its golden crown scattering light across the rippling water. Along the shore, Jesus stood quietly, his eyes fixed upon the horizon. The disciples were stirring in the nearby camp, rubbing sleep from their eyes, unaware that this day would hold a lesson they would carry for the rest of their lives. Jesus breathed in deeply. Every sunrise, he knew, was not merely the beginning of another day, but a reminder of the Father's mercies, new every morning. He turned toward the small group gathering around the fire, and his voice broke the morning stillness. "Come," he said gently, "let us walk." The disciples followed him, the sand crunching softly under their sandals. They passed fishermen hauling in their nets, mothers calling their children home from play, and travelers beginning their long day's journey. Life was beginning again, as it did every morning, yet today, Jesus had something different to give them. After a short walk, they reached a rocky ledge overlooking the water. Jesus sat down, and they gathered close. "Look at the sun," he began. "It rises each day without fail. It warms the earth, feeds the plants, lights the way for travelers. Yet it asks for nothing in return. My Father's love is greater still. If the sun gives its light freely, how much more should you give the light I have placed in you?" The disciples exchanged thoughtful glances. Peter, ever curious, leaned forward. "Master, how do we keep our light burning when the world feels dark?" Jesus smiled softly, as though he had been waiting for this question. "By remembering that the light is not your own, it is mine. The darkness cannot overcome it. Not storms, not fear, not even the weight of sorrow. As the sun rises today, so too can your spirit rise in me." For a long moment, they sat in silence, listening to the water lapping against the rocks, watching the sun lift higher into the sky. And in that stillness, something settled in their hearts, the quiet conviction that no matter what awaited them, the light would remain. The morning sun had now climbed higher, casting long beams of light that pierced through the gaps in the date palms along the path. The road ahead was dusty but alive. Children ran barefoot, their laughter echoing through the narrow lanes, and the faint smell of fresh bread wafted from a baker's small oven. The village stirred with its Monday rhythm. Merchants arranging baskets of figs, women drawing water from the well, and shepherds guiding goats toward the hills. Jesus and his disciples walked slowly, not in a hurry, as if every step had a purpose. He noticed everything. The woman struggling to lift a heavy jar, the boy chasing a runaway lamb, the old man sitting in the shade with eyes clouded from years of labor. Each face, each moment was precious to him. A young girl carrying a bundle of cloth stopped when she saw the group approaching. Her eyes widened as she recognized the teacher she had heard about from her parents. Clutching her bundle, she stepped closer. "Rabbi," she said shyly, "will you bless my family? My father is sick." Jesus knelt to meet her gaze, his smile gentle and full of warmth. "Take me to him," he said. The girl's face lit up, and she guided them through the winding alleys to a small stone house. Inside, the air was cool but heavy with the smell of herbs and oil. On a low bed lay a man, pale and weak, his breathing shallow. His wife knelt beside him, eyes red from sleepless nights. Jesus stepped forward. The wife began to speak, but his raised hand stilled her. He sat beside the man and gently placed his hand on his forehead. The room seemed to grow still. No sounds from the street, no clatter of work outside, just the soft sound of breathing and the quiet presence of something greater than time itself. "Father," Jesus prayed softly, "let your mercy rise upon this house as the sun rises upon the earth." Almost instantly, the man's eyes fluttered open. He inhaled deeply, as though waking from a long dream. Color returned to his face. His wife gasped, tears spilling freely, and the young girl dropped her bundle to embrace her father. The neighbors began to gather at the doorway, whispering, pointing, marveling. But Jesus didn't stay for their praise. He simply stood, gave a small nod to the family, and said, "Give him food, and thank God, for his love endures forever." As they stepped back onto the village road, John, walking close beside him, whispered, "Rabbi, you could have spoken from the road, and he would have been healed. Why go to him?" Jesus' eyes softened, watching a pair of sparrows take flight above the rooftops. "Because love walks the road, John. Love does not stand far off. It enters the home, it touches the hand, it shares the burden. To heal from a distance is power. To walk to them is compassion." The disciples fell silent, each holding the words in their hearts. By the time they reached the edge of the village, the road opened to the fields beyond. The sky was a deeper blue now, and the air carried the mingled scents of wildflowers and tilled earth. Ahead lay the hills, and beyond them, more people, more stories, more hearts in need of light. Jesus paused for a moment, looking back at the village they had left. In his gaze, there was no pride, no expectation of thanks, only the quiet joy of having given without asking in return. It was this unseen reward that kept him walking forward. And so the road stretched ahead, winding like the journey of every soul, some parts shaded, others blazing with light, yet always moving toward the Father's will. The road from the village curved gently upward, leading to the green slopes that rolled toward the distant mountains. The air felt fresher here, scented with wild thyme and the faint sweetness of blooming almond trees. Birds darted overhead, their songs carrying in the open wind, and the sound of sheep bells drifted from somewhere beyond the ridge. Jesus walked at an unhurried pace, his sandals pressing into the damp earth. The disciples followed, speaking quietly among themselves. Some glanced back at the village, still visible in the distance, its roofs shining faintly under the late morning sun. Others looked ahead to the rise of the hill, wondering where he was leading them. At the crest, they reached a flat, grassy expanse overlooking the Sea of Galilee. The water stretched far and wide, glistening like molten silver beneath the sun. From here, the fishing boats below looked like scattered leaves drifting across the surface. The wind brushed gently across their faces, carrying with it the distant voices of fishermen calling to one another. Jesus turned to them and sat down on a smooth rock. The disciples gathered around, forming a loose circle. His eyes scanned the horizon, as though drawing a truth from the beauty before them. "Look at the lilies," he began, pointing to a patch of white and purple blooms scattered across the slope. "They do not spin thread. They do not store grain. Yet your Father clothes them in splendor greater than Solomon's robes." The disciples followed his gaze, some smiling at the flowers swaying in the wind. Andrew plucked one, twirling it between his fingers. "And yet," Jesus continued, "they are here only a short time. Tomorrow the sun will wither them, and they will return to the earth. Still, the Father cares for them. If he cares for something so brief, how much more does he care for you?" Philip leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Rabbi, then why does worry come to us, even when we know God is good?" Jesus' eyes softened. "Because you still measure God's love by your circumstance instead of by his promise. The lilies do not think about the next rain. They only receive what the day gives. So too must your heart rest, not in what you see, but in the one you cannot see." A shepherd passed by below, guiding a flock across the lower slope. One young lamb strayed toward the edge of the path, distracted by a tuft of grass. The shepherd left the others and hurried to guide it back. Jesus pointed, "See that? Even the shepherd leaves the 99 for the one who wanders. And my Father is the same. When you stray, he does not stand at a distance. He comes down the hill for you." The disciples sat quietly, the wind moving through their hair, the distant water shimmering like a living parable of God's faithfulness. The scene around them, the flowers, the sheep, the open sky, was more than nature. It was a sermon painted by the Creator himself. After a long silence, Jesus stood. Come. The day has more for us to see. They descended the hill slowly, the disciples turning the words over in their minds. For some, the lesson was simple. God provides. For others, it went deeper. God seeks, God clothes, God holds the wandering heart. And for all of them, the hillside became more than a place. It became a living memory they would carry when storms came. As they reached the base, Peter glanced back at the crest, the lilies still waving in the wind. A quiet thought settled in him. If the Lord cares for these, he will care for me. The path beyond the hillside narrowed into a rugged dirt road, winding between low stone walls that marked the edge of scattered olive groves. The sun had climbed higher now, and the shadows were shorter, the air warmer. A soft breeze rustled through the branches, carrying the smell of crushed olives and fresh earth. As Jesus and the disciples walked, the hum of the countryside filled the air, bees moving from blossom to blossom, the distant hammering of a carpenter's tools, the creak of a cart wheel somewhere ahead. It wasn't long before they saw them. A small group of travelers coming slowly from the opposite direction. Their clothes were worn and dust-stained, their steps heavy. A man leaned on a stick, his ankle wrapped in a rough cloth. Beside him, a young boy clutched a small sack, his eyes darting with the wary look of one who has known hardship. A woman walked a little ahead, her face drawn but dignified, balancing a clay jar on her shoulder. When they drew near, the woman lowered her gaze, as if expecting to be passed by without notice. The man nodded politely, saying nothing, but Jesus stopped in the middle of the road. "Peace to you," he said, his voice warm. They hesitated. Then the woman answered quietly, "And to you, Rabbi." Jesus' eyes fell to the man's ankle. "You have walked far." The man gave a small, tired smile. "From Tyre. My work there ended. We go now to find my brother in Magdala." Peter, standing behind Jesus, glanced at the others. They still had a long way to walk themselves. But Jesus stepped forward. "Sit," he said gently, pointing to a shaded patch of grass by the wall. "Rest a while." The travelers looked at each other, uncertain. Strangers didn't often offer such hospitality on the road, especially to the weary and poor. Yet something in his voice left no room for suspicion. They sat. From the small satchel slung over his shoulder, Jesus drew out some bread and dried figs. Andrew and John, catching the gesture, began to pull food from their own packs. Soon there was enough for everyone to share. As they ate, the boy's cautious glances softened. The woman's shoulders relaxed. The man leaned back against the wall, breathing more easily. The disciples listened as the family spoke of their journey, of losing their home in a storm, of working in strange towns for small wages, of walking for days in hope of a welcome. When they finished eating, Jesus stood and knelt beside the man. With gentle hands, he unwound the cloth from his ankle. The skin beneath was swollen and bruised. Jesus placed his hand there, and for a moment, the road was utterly silent. Then the man exhaled sharply, eyes widening as the pain faded. He looked up at Jesus, speechless. But Jesus only said, "Walk lightly now, as the Father walks with you." The man rose to his feet, testing his step. A grin spread across his face, and his wife clasped her hands to her chest. The boy ran forward, wrapping his arms around his father. The travelers thanked him again and again, but Jesus shook his head. "Thank the one who gave you the road." As they parted ways, the disciples resumed their journey, a thoughtful quiet settling over them. It was James who finally spoke. "Rabbi, there were so many along the road today. Why stop for them?" Jesus looked at him with a knowing smile. "Because on the road of life, the strangers you pass are the neighbors you're called to love." The words sank deep, carried by the wind through the olive groves. The road stretched ahead once more, but now, each face they would see along the way held the possibility of holy purpose. The afternoon sun hung in the sky, filtering through the leaves of tall sycamore and fig trees. The road had led them down into a gentle valley where the air was cooler, carrying the constant murmur of running water. Ahead, a narrow river wound its way between smooth stones, its surface glinting like a ribbon of glass beneath the sunlight. The disciples, weary from the hours of walking, welcomed the sight. They knelt along the bank, cupping water in their hands to drink. The cold rush of it was a relief against the heat of the day. Jesus, however, stood for a moment, watching the current. The water tumbled over rocks, weaving around obstacles, never pausing, never turning back. Peter noticed his stillness. "Rabbi, will you not drink?" Jesus stepped forward and crouched at the edge, letting the water run over his fingers. "Tell me, Peter, can you touch the same water twice?" Peter tilted his head, puzzled. "No, Master. Once it passes, it is gone." Jesus smiled faintly, looking at the flowing river. "So it is with each moment of your life. It flows past, never to return. What is done, and yet, just as the river is always renewed from its source, so too can a heart be renewed when it returns to the Father." The disciples gathered closer, listening. The soft rush of the water seemed to join his words, each syllable flowing like part of the current. "There are many," he continued, "who try to hold on to what is already past, the words they regret, the wrongs they suffered, the wrongs they caused. But the river does not hold the stone that falls into it. It carries it away. If you cling to your pain, you'll never move forward. Forgive and let it pass, so that your heart may flow freely." Andrew looked down at the water, seeing his own reflection tremble on the surface. Memories of his own failings stirred within him. Times he had spoken harshly, moments of doubt when faith seemed small. The current seemed to whisper an invitation. Let go. Jesus reached into the river, scooped up a handful of water, and let it spill back through his fingers. You cannot grasp what is meant to flow. Hold too tightly to the past, and you lose the gift of the present. A kingfisher darted across the water, its wings flashing blue and silver before vanishing into the trees. The moment was brief, beautiful, and unrepeatable, just as he had said. Jesus then turned to the disciples with a gentle firmness in his tone. You will go to many towns, meet many people. Some will welcome you, others will reject you. Do not let rejection stay with you like a shadow. Wash your feet, bless them, and walk on. The words felt light but powerful, like the current itself, quiet yet relentless. The disciples understood. This was not only a lesson about forgiveness toward others, but also about forgiving themselves. They remained by the river a while longer, eating in silence, watching the water's endless journey. When they finally rose to leave, the sound of the current followed them, as if the river itself was carrying the lesson onward. As they walked back to the path, John glanced over his shoulder, the sunlight glinting on the water one last time. A quiet peace settled over him. He thought of his own burdens, and for the first time in a long while, felt them lighten. By the time they left the riverside, the sun had shifted westward, casting a softer light across the land. The road eventually widened and led into a bustling town square, a marketplace alive with movement and noise. Vendors called out over one another, their voices competing for attention. Fresh bread, still warm from the oven. Dates and figs, sweet as honey. Fine linen, stronger than Roman cloth. The air was a mingling of smells, roasting meat, fragrant spices, and the earthy scent of clay pots stacked neatly beside a potter's stall. Children darted through the crowd, chasing one another around baskets of pomegranates. A stray dog sniffed near a fishmonger's stand before being shooed away. Jesus and the disciples moved slowly through the throng. Some heads turned at the sight of him, whispers passing from mouth to ear. Others were too caught in their own business to notice. Near the center of the market, a sudden commotion erupted. A trader and a customer were shouting at one another, faces red with anger. The trader accused the man of trying to pay less than the agreed price. The customer claimed he had been cheated. Their voices rose, drawing a circle of onlookers. Peter took a step forward, ready to speak, but Jesus raised his hand. He moved through the crowd until he stood between the two men. "Peace to you both," he said evenly. The trader crossed his arms. "There's no peace here, Rabbi. This man insults my work." The customer jabbed a finger toward the trader. "And he overcharges the poor." The crowd murmured. Some nodded in agreement, others whispered doubt. Jesus looked from one to the other. "Tell me," he asked the trader, "when you began your work this morning, did you pray for many sales?" The man blinked, then nodded. "And you," he said to the customer, "did you pray to find a fair price?" The customer hesitated, then said softly, "Yes." Jesus' eyes moved over the onlookers. "Then you both prayed to the same Father. Why do you stand here as enemies?" The crowd fell quiet. Even the sound of the market seemed to dim for a moment. He reached into his own small pouch and drew out a few coins. Placing them between the two men, he said, "Let this pay the difference. Not because one of you is right and the other wrong, but because the Father's name is worth more than your pride." The trader stared at the coins, then at the customer. The man lowered his eyes, shame softening his face. Without a word, they both stepped back. Jesus turned to the crowd. "You measure greatness by who wins the argument. I tell you, greatness is in who chooses peace." A woman near the front bowed her head. A boy tugged at his father's robe, whispering that he wanted to remember those words. The market slowly resumed its rhythm, though the air seemed different, quieter, gentler. As they left the square, James spoke under his breath. "Rabbi, you could have told them who was right. Why not?" Jesus looked at him with a faint smile. "Because being right is not always the same as being righteous." The words sank deep into the disciples' hearts. Behind them, the marketplace buzzed again, but somewhere in the noise was the quiet echo of a greater truth, one that would follow them far beyond this Monday. The sun was beginning to lower toward the horizon, painting the sky in warm shades of amber and rose. The air carried a cooler touch now, and the shadows of the disciples stretched long along the dusty road. After the bustle of the marketplace, the countryside felt quiet, almost like the earth itself was taking a deep breath before nightfall. A small house appeared in the distance, its whitewashed walls catching the last rays of the sun. Smoke rose gently from its chimney, carrying the scent of baking bread and roasted lentils. As they approached, a man stepped outside, wiping his hands on a cloth. His face lit up with recognition. "Rabbi, you honor my home." Jesus smiled and clasped the man's shoulder. "Peace to this house." The man's name was Eliab, a humble farmer who had once heard Jesus speak by the lakeshore. Without hesitation, he invited them in. Inside, the walls were simple, decorated only with a few woven mats and clay jars neatly lined against one side. His wife and two children greeted them warmly, the youngest shyly hiding behind her mother's robe. They sat around a low table. Bowls of lentils, olives, figs, and fresh bread were placed before them. The scent filled the room, mingling with the warmth of the small oil lamp flickering in the center. The disciples, hungry from the day's journey, began to reach for the food, but Jesus lifted his hand. "Before we eat," he said softly, "let us give thanks." They bowed their heads. Jesus spoke not a long prayer, but a simple one, thanking the Father for the hands that planted, the rain that nourished, the harvest that provided, and the love that welcomed them. His words were slow and deliberate, as though each one was a piece of bread being offered to the soul. When they began to eat, there was no rush. The food was passed with care, the bread broken and shared evenly. Eliab's wife smiled as she noticed her youngest daughter giggling quietly beside John, who was teaching her how to tear the bread without spilling crumbs. Halfway through the meal, Jesus looked around the table. "Eliab, you have given freely from what you have. Do you know the worth of this gift?" Eliab shook his head. "Rabbi, it is only a little food." Jesus' gaze softened. The value of a gift is not in its size, but in the heart that gives it. A rich man may give gold and still keep more for himself. But when a man shares his table with strangers, he gives something far greater. He gives himself. The room fell into a gentle silence. Even the children seemed to feel the weight of his words. Outside, The first stars had begun to appear, peeking through the darkening sky. When a meal was finished, Jesus helped Eliab gather the bowls. The disciples watched, surprised. This was not the way of most teachers, who expected to be served. But here, there was no division between master and guest, teacher and student, only the shared bond of gratitude. Before leaving, Jesus placed his hand on the little girl's head. "May your home always have enough," he said, "and may your hearts always remember the giver of every good thing." As they stepped back into the cool evening air, the oil lamp inside flickered warmly in the doorway, like a small star left behind. The disciples walked on in silence for a while. Finally, Matthew spoke. "Rabbi, why do you always seem to make the smallest moments feel so full?" Jesus glanced at him, the faintest smile touching his lips. "Because gratitude turns what you have into enough." Night had fully descended, and the road ahead was bathed in the silver glow of the moon. The air was cool now, carrying the faint scent of jasmine from the hedges that lined parts of the path. Above them, the sky was vast and unbroken, filled with countless stars shimmering like a sea of diamonds spilled across black velvet. The disciples walked quietly, their sandals crunching softly over the dirt. The events of the day still lingered in their minds. The healing in the village, the lesson on the hillside, the strangers on the road, the rivers flowing forgiveness, the marketplace peace, and the meal of gratitude. Yet now, the night seemed to invite a different kind of reflection. Jesus stopped in a small clearing where the road widened. A low hill rose beside them, topped with a few olive trees whose twisted branches reached upward like hands in prayer. He walked up the slope and sat on a flat rock, looking at the sky. The disciples joined him, settling into the grass, the cool blades brushing against their hands. They followed his gaze upward. The stars seemed almost close enough to touch. "Do you see them?" Jesus asked softly. John nodded. "Yes, Rabbi. Too many to count." Jesus' voice was low, almost a whisper. "Long before you were born, these same stars shone over Abraham. God promised him that his descendants would be as countless as these lights. Abraham could not see the full promise, but he trusted the one who made it." Thomas tilted his head back, staring upward. "But Rabbi, what if we wait for something God has promised, and it doesn't come when we expect?" Jesus glanced at him, the moonlight outlining his features. "Then you must remember, God's timing is not your timing. A seed does not bloom the day it is planted. The stars you see tonight, some have been shining for thousands of years before their light reached your eyes. The promise may already be moving toward you, even if you cannot yet see it." A cool breeze moved through the olive branches, making them sway gently against the night. Somewhere in the distance, a night bird called. Jesus picked up a small stone from the ground, rolling it between his fingers. When you trust God's timing, you find rest. You do not need to force his hand or rush his plan. Look at the stars. They do not fight to shine. They simply remain where the Father placed them, and in their place, they light the world. Peter leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Jesus. "So, we are to be like the stars." Jesus smiled. "Yes, Peter, steadfast, patient, trusting, and when it is your time, you will shine as he intended." They sat in silence for a long while after that, each lost in thought. The sky seemed endless, the stars unblinking witnesses to promises made long before their lifetimes. At last, Jesus stood and looked down the path. Come, the night is not yet over, and the Father still has steps for us to take." As they walked on, the stars seemed to follow, lighting the road just enough for their journey, like small reminders that even in darkness, God's promises guide the way. The night air was still, except for the soft crunch of their sandals on the dirt path. The stars above seemed to hum with quiet glory, yet ahead, a faint, flickering glow interrupted the darkness, the warm light of a single lantern swaying gently in the breeze. As they drew closer, the lantern revealed a man sitting on the roadside. His shoulders were hunched, and his robe was worn thin, patched in several places. Beside him sat a small wooden cart, one wheel broken, the load of clay water jars leaning dangerously to one side. Jesus slowed his pace and approached the man. "Peace be with you, friend," he said gently. The man looked up, startled. His eyes carried the heaviness of exhaustion. "And peace to you, Rabbi," he replied quietly. I fear I will not reach the market tonight. One of my jars is already cracked, and now the wheel. I am too tired to fix it." The disciples exchanged glances. It was late, and the journey to their lodging was still long. Yet Jesus did not hesitate. He knelt beside the cart, running his hand along the splintered wood of the wheel. "A burden shared," Jesus said, "is a burden halved." Peter stepped forward, rolling up his sleeves. John knelt beside the cracked jar, adjusting its position so it would not spill further. Matthew lit a second lantern to give them more light. In the quiet of the night, they worked together, tightening the wheel's axle with strips of leather, balancing the jars, and shifting the load so it could be pulled more easily. The man watched, his tired eyes slowly softening into gratitude. "Why would you help me?" he asked. "You owe me nothing." Jesus stood and placed a hand on his shoulder. "The greatest among you is not the one who is served, but the one who serves. When we lift another's burden, we honor the one who lifts ours." When the wheel was repaired, they helped the man to his feet. The cart moved forward smoothly now, the lantern's light bouncing across the path ahead. The man turned to Jesus, bowing his head. "Rabbi, I will remember this night for the rest of my days." Jesus smiled. "And I will remember your gratitude. Go in peace, and may your jars always carry the water that brings life." As they continued their walk, James whispered to John, "We lost time tonight, but it feels as though we have gained something far greater." Jesus overheard and answered without turning his head. "Time given in love is never lost." The path ahead was quiet again, but now their hearts were warmer than the lantern's glow, carrying the simple joy of having served a stranger in need. The night had finally given way to the first whispers of dawn. A pale silver light stretched across the horizon, brushing the tops of the olive trees with the gentlest of gold. Dew clung to every blade of grass, and a faint mist curled upward from the valleys below. Jesus led the disciples up a low hill, the path soft under their feet. No words were spoken. The silence was filled with the sacred beauty of a new day being born. When they reached the top, the land opened before them like a vast, living canvas. The fields, the quiet river winding in the distance, the rooftops of a sleeping village. The sky above was slowly painted in layers, deep indigo giving way to violet, then to rose, then to the brilliance of gold. Jesus sat on a flat stone, his eyes fixed on the rising sun. The disciples gathered around him, some sitting, others standing, all waiting in the stillness. Finally, he spoke, his voice gentle, yet carrying with it the weight of eternity. "You have walked with me through the darkness of night, and now you see the day begin. Such is the way of life. Darkness will come, but it cannot stay. Light will always return." He looked at each of them, his gaze holding a different kind of light, the light of understanding, of love that saw beyond weakness and failure. "Do not be afraid of the nights in your journey," he continued. "In those hours, you will learn patience, courage, and compassion. And when the dawn comes, you will see more clearly the path God has prepared for you." A gentle breeze passed over the hill, carrying the faint scent of wild thyme. Jesus raised his hand toward the rising sun. Every sunrise is a reminder. The story is not over. The Father is still writing it. And if he can paint the sky with such beauty after the night, how much more will he restore your heart after your trials? The disciples sat in silence, their hearts deeply stirred. Peter, who had been restless through much of the night, now felt peace settle over him like the morning mist. John felt tears well in his eyes, not from sorrow, but from an overwhelming sense of hope. Jesus rose to his feet. "Let us go into the day," he said, smiling. "There is much to do and much love to give." They descended the hill together, the sun now warm upon their faces. And as they walked, the shadows retreated behind them. As the camera would fade from the golden sunrise, the voice would remain. Perhaps you're in a night right now, walking a path that feels lonely, carrying burdens that feel too heavy. But hear this, the night will not last forever. The same God who paints the morning sky will bring light to your life again. Hold on, keep walking, and when your dawn comes, you will see it was worth every step. What about you? Have you ever seen your own morning on the hill? A moment when hope returned after the darkness? Share your story in the comments. Your words might be the sunrise someone else is waiting for.